Human types Misericordia, or Misericordem, which is probably more grammatically correct as a name. The best way to describe the psychosis-hylomorphism or energy type identified as Misericordem would be as a partiality or bias towards purity and sensitivity, as in a self-ideal and needs from the environment. Of course, this sounds somewhat vague and universal, so it is important to understand that bias towards purity and sensitivity means that it often comes at the expense of pretty much everything else. We are all sensitive to a certain extent, but not all of us are so preoccupied and fixated on our sensitivity, on things that bother us, and on whether the environment and people are satisfying or not. Unlike the focus on living up to the expectations of the environment, which is more adaptive and agreeable, a high sensitivity towards the environment is more critical, dissatisfied, fearful, inhibited, and neurotic. Being dissatisfied and sensitive always produces a questioning attitude, with a focus on understanding one's situation or escaping the dissatisfaction into other realms, which is why this type is frequently confused with schizoid character in bioenergetics, the INTP in the Myers-Briggs, or the sapientiam types in our model. The main difference appears to be that Misericordem is more at the mercy of the environment to feel satisfied. For example, that other people validate them or don't hurt them with words, that people be friendly and compassionate, or that people be not too vulgar or insensitive. In other words, it is a more feminine energy than the more masculine sapientiam types, who much easier can ignore or disregard the environment and be satisfied on their own. The greater orientation towards the environment and people leads to a greater sensitivity and dependency on what other people think of them.
Varför är det så viktigt att vara maskulin?
Jamen det er det, når man er så lidt maskulin, som jeg er, va? Om jeg bare havde været normal maskulin, så havde det ikke været vigtigt. Men det er det, når jeg er jo så der. Jeg er jo mere kvinde end mand.
Misericordia means compassion and refers to the empathy and focus on human suffering that often results from greater sensitivity. An alternative name for the instinct is simply sensitivum, since it is the most sensitive type.
I was gonna cry. Oh my god, I was gonna cry because my teacher told me my painting was like underdeveloped. And like, I just was so upset about that. I was so mad at him. So mad at him. Oh my god, what an ass.
Looking at its position on the conceptual map, where we remember the context, relation and nature of these character phenomena, we see that Misericordem, or Misericordia, is located in the Gratum sphere at the left plus column. Since the middle sphere of Gratum represents motion and still dominates in this energy, Misericordia, being motion plus, can thus be said to be the reflection of the higher sphere in the middle sphere. In other words, this is a mixture of Gratum and Sapientiam, or, if you prefer, of Fiduciam and Urbanum. However, since Misericordia is located in the Gratum sphere, and is primarily a Gratum type, it is somewhat closer to Urbanum than to Fiduciam, and can be considered a modified Urbanum. The effect is mostly that Misericordia becomes more mentally escapistic and more complex than Urbanum. Hence the presence of more depth and questioning of cultural norms in Misericordia. Out of all the types that are not Sapientiam types, Misericordem is the closest to being a Sapientiam type, hence why they are likely to identify with the Sapientiam sphere. Because of that, I'm trying to be extra careful in this presentation, and try to describe Misericordem at the most fundamental and basic level, not going into too many extreme manifestations. With extreme manifestations, I'm referring to people like the school shooter Adam Lanza, who washed his hands and changed socks 20 times a day, refused to touch a handle with his bare hands, refused to have a Christmas tree in the house, often had crying attacks and locked himself in his room for several hours, and did not eat his food unless it was arranged in a special way on the plate. All of these are manifestations that can happen due to high sensitivity and squeamishness, especially in combination with other energies such as the justice-oriented magnitudinum energy. The combination of Misericordem and Magnitudinem often creates a strong desire for fairness and revenge, the typical victim mentality. Other extreme manifestations occur in combination with Exirium, which makes Misericordem types appear more outrageous, colorful, and similar to Libidinem types, but more paranoid. Several bizarre female shooters have been this combination, such as Valerie Solanas and Nassim Nayafi Agdam. However, excluding these combinations, Misericordem types usually come across as a more bland form of urbanum, too concerned with other people's opinions and judgments that they inhibit themselves too much.
Getting my political opinion out there and maybe even influencing some people is an opportunity I really want to have. But I have one motive that is bigger than them all, which is that I freaking love the idea of having something outside of my daily life, where I can upload whenever I want with people watching, that grows without me doing anything particularly often, and in best case scenario even gives me some extra money outside of my studying or work.
Hideaki Anno, the famous anime director, used the metaphor of the hedgehog's dilemma for his self-insert character Shinji Ikari in Neon Genesis Evangelion. When hedgehogs try to get close to one another, they risk hurting each other with their sharp spines. Some people are similar. Due to sensitivity and fear of being hurt, they don't know how to approach others. Thus they either inhibit or control themselves so much that they don't leave much of an impression, or they come across as overly sensitive and weird, and in that way annoy others and attract bullying. With meritum in their configuration, they sometimes become politicians, similar to urbanum types, and can be confused with corpus types. Our current Prime Minister in Sweden, Stefan Löfven, is actually a Misericordem type, but does not leave much of an impression beyond a kind of awkwardness. I have talked about how the Gratum sphere is rooted in the limbic system, which is rooted in emotions like anxiety, and misericordemic sensitivity is no doubt related to anxiety. Both the sapientiam sphere and the Gratum sphere are sensitive, since they lack the desensitization and connection with the earth found in the morum sphere. However, the sapientiam types tend to forget their sensitivity through the power of their minds and living in abstractions, not in emotions, and thus can even come across as insensitive, because they are out of touch with what's going on in their environment. This is the reason Misericordem types come across as more sensitive, and why we could argue that the Gratum sphere is more sensitive. But Libidinem is more desensitized due to the mixture with the morum sphere. And urbanum tries to ignore their anxiety through constant activity and trying to spread happiness. So Magnitudinem and Abstractum are probably the most sensitive after Misericordem. And that's why it is difficult to say which sphere is more sensitive overall. Misericordem wants to fit in and be pleasing like urbanum types, but is less stable or competent due to higher sensitivity and being prone to dreams and imagination like the sapientiam types. So they try to escape into dreams and fantasy like fiduciam types, but are often too anxious and concerned with people or needs from the environment to fully leave the social realm behind. And this seems to lead to a lot of personal anguish and suffering, being sort of caught between two worlds. Although some of the more socially competent ones tries to be happy and cheerful and entertaining like urbanum types, and can sometimes do that with success.
I tried to be conservative.
Are you normally conservative? I mean,
No, I don't think so.
yeah,
I mean, you know, other people don't think so. I'm conservative.
yeah. How do you?
How can I be more needy? First, what you have to do is to think to yourself how your life will be complete when you get this thing that you desire. Then what you need to do is obsess over it constantly. Then, when you almost get it, you need to push it away or become dissatisfied with it and move the goalposts. Then repeat.
The imagination of Misericordem types is usually used to fantasize about getting a certain thing to feel complete, like validation or romantic love, and creates a desire that can't be satisfied because if they do get what they're looking for, it is not as great as they imagined it to be. So they keep dreaming and desiring. If they idealize someone using their imagination, thinking they are in love, they can often leave the relationship or even start hating the person once the illusion is broken by reality. And just like with urbanum types, Misericordem can suffer from a lack of authenticity when they try to control their actions or live up to an ideal self.
I don't know what you don't see in me. I'm the perfect guy. And yet you throw yourselves at all these obnoxious men, instead of me, the supreme gentleman.
But Misericordem types are usually more aware of their own flaws, and often idealize other people more. In this way they tend to feel inferior and judge themselves. So the spiritual problem for Misericordem tends to be a difficulty being satisfied by themselves on their own, being too dependent on people and the environment to feel happy, neediness and squeamishness. The spiritual strength is looking deeper at things, especially in the realm of human relationships and human suffering, and having a lot of sensitivity and compassion for living things, including animals.